The sound of tearing paper, sharp, clean, cutting through the marble-floored hall like a gunshot with no bullet. The invitation fell in two pieces. Nia Carter didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't scan the room looking for someone to validate her. She simply held the gaze of the woman who had just done it, whose hand was still trembling slightly because the motion had come out harder than intended. Then bent down, picked up both halves, smoothed them flat, and held them again. Not a word. 20 people had already turned. 5 phones were already up. One live stream had climbed to 3,000 viewers in under 40 seconds. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Madeline Hawthorne's voice rose again, sharper this time, calibrated to carry across the room like a verdict. "We've had issues with fraudulent tickets before, and our family has a responsibility to protect the integrity of this event." Responsibility. She used that word. While her son, Chase Hawthorne, 28 years old, 1.5 million TikTok followers, was already zooming directly into Nia's face and whispering into his phone. "Guys, she's not leaving. This is actually insane right now." While his sister Sloane tilted her camera left for a better angle and typed into her Instagram live, "Genuinely painful to watch. Read the room, sis." While head of security Grant Miller stood 3 feet away, hand clenching and unclenching at his side, clearly unsure whose authority he was supposed to defer to. And Nia, 26 years old, simple black dress, no designer labels, no statement jewelry, no one standing beside her, just stood there, eyes steady, not performing calm, actually calm. Have you ever been judged before anyone knew who you were? Have you ever stood in a room that decided you didn't belong and had to choose in that exact moment whether to explain yourself or simply refuse to? What none of them knew, what Madeline Hawthorne had not considered for a single second before tearing that invitation, was that Nia had known this moment was coming. Not intuition, not coincidence. She had prepared for this exact scenario long before she walked through those doors, and she was recording everything. 3 weeks before the gala, Nia's alarm went off at 5:47 a.m., not 5:45, not 6 o'clock, 5:47, because that was exactly how long she needed to shower, dress, grab coffee from the machine in the break room before her supervisor arrived, and be seated at her desk before the 6:30 shift log populated. She was a program coordinator at Carter Community Fund, not the founder's daughter on paper. Not anywhere on the org chart did her last name connect to anything significant. She had applied through the public portal, interviewed twice, and been hired because she knew education policy the way other people knew sports statistics, effortlessly, precisely, with context that made senior staff uncomfortable when she spoke in meetings. She had asked her father not to tell anyone. He had respected that. Her office was a shared workspace on the 3rd floor. One window, northeast facing, which meant no direct sunlight until late afternoon, when it didn't matter anymore. She kept her desk clear except for 3 things: a legal pad, a pen, and a small framed quote facing only her, not for anyone else to read. The work was real. The hours were real. The $54,000 annual salary was real. She reviewed grant applications, coordinated site visits to under-resourced schools, drafted impact reports that sometimes landed in front of people whose names were on university buildings. She did it without shortcuts, without leverage, without ever mentioning that the man whose signature funded 30% of the organization's annual budget was the same man who had taught her to read using flashcards on a kitchen floor in Atlanta. Some days that felt like discipline. Other days it felt like its own quiet kind of loneliness. She ate lunch at her desk most days, a container from home, usually something she'd made Sunday night in batches. She didn't do this to save money, though it helped. She did it because the lunch hour was the only 60 minutes where no one expected anything from her, and she had learned a long time ago to protect that. Her colleagues liked her, not in the way people like someone who makes everything easier, in the way people like someone who makes everything more honest. She asked the questions in meetings that everyone else had already written down and crossed out. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just trying to do the work right. And 3 weeks from that Tuesday morning, she would walk into a room full of people who would decide, in under 30 seconds, that she didn't belong there. She already knew it was coming. She just didn't know it would be filmed. Nia had one rule she never explained to anyone. Not because it was complicated, because the moment you explain a principle, people start negotiating with it. The rule was simple. Don't call him unless every other door is closed, locked, and you've already tried the window. Him was her father, Terrence Carter, founder of Carter Ed, architect of one of the largest education technology expansions in American history, currently in active negotiations with 4 state governments and 2 foreign ministries. A man whose calendar was managed by 2 assistants and whose name appeared in the same sentences as words like legacy and infrastructure and generational impact. He was also the man who had driven her to her first day of kindergarten in a 2003 Civic because the nonprofit he was building at the time couldn't yet afford health insurance, let alone a better car. She knew exactly who he was. Both versions, and she had decided years ago that she would not use one to prop up the other. This wasn't stubbornness. She had thought it through with the same precision she applied to grant analysis. If she called her father every time a system pushed back on her, she would never know which outcomes she had actually earned. She would never know if her judgment was sound or simply protected, and the people around her would never have to confront the fact that they were wrong, because the intervention would erase the record of what they had done. She wanted the record intact. That was the part she never said out loud. She believed, in the way that people believe things they've tested rather than been told, that systems don't change because someone powerful shows up. They change because someone ordinary refuses to disappear and documents everything while doing it. 2 sentences. No poster, no speech. Just a thing she knew. She kept a running log on her phone. Not a journal, a log. Dates, times, exact quotes, names when she had them, descriptions when she didn't. She had started it 18 months ago after a site visit where a school principal had spoken to her like she was a delivery person rather than the program coordinator holding his school's funding review. She hadn't called anyone that day either. She had written down what he said, word for word, noted the 2 teachers who were present, and submitted her site visit report with professional precision. 3 months later, that principal was placed on a performance improvement plan following an independent review. She hadn't filed the complaint. Someone else had. Someone who had read her report. That was when she understood. The work was the weapon, accuracy was the armor, and patience, real, costly, unglamorous patience, was the only strategy that left no room for doubt. She didn't need to be powerful. She needed to be unimpeachable. The invitation had arrived on a Thursday, not to her personal address, to the office, addressed to the Carter Community Fund Program Coordination Department, attention, N. Carter. Standard formatting. Official letterhead from the Capital Arts and Futures Gala Committee. 2 tickets to the annual donor recognition event at the Orion Civic Center, Washington, D.C. Table placement. Presenting sponsor section. She had stared at it for a long moment before opening her desk drawer and pulling out her log. Thursday, 14th. Received dual invitation. Presenting sponsor designation. Gala date, 21st. 7 days. 7 days was not a lot of time, but that wasn't what made her hand tighten around the pen. What made her hand tighten was the second document she found beneath the invitation, a printed internal memo, routing number she didn't recognize, flagged for program coordination review. It outlined a proposed restructuring of the fund's community grant allocation process. New approval layers, new oversight committee, new language around organizational alignment that, if anyone had bothered to read it carefully, effectively gave an external board veto power over grants that currently required only internal sign-off. The restructuring was scheduled for a board vote on the 22nd, 1 day after the gala. She read the memo 3 times, then she read it again. The framing was clean. The language was reasonable on the surface. Accountability, transparency, stakeholder alignment. But buried in Section 4, subsection C, was a clause that would reclassify 14 active community grants as pending alignment review. 14 grants, 11 schools, somewhere between 800 and 1,000 students whose after-school programs, literacy interventions, and college prep support would be frozen pending a review process with no defined timeline. If the vote passed on the 22nd, the freeze would begin on the 1st of the following month, 19 days from now. She needed the gala, not for the chandeliers or the donor photographs. She needed access to 3 specific board members who would be in that room, members who had not yet confirmed their vote and who, based on her read of their public statements, might be persuadable if someone walked them through Section 4, subsection C, with the actual student impact data attached. She could not send this through her father. Not because he wouldn't help, he would, immediately, without question. But the moment his name entered this conversation, every outcome would be attributed to his intervention. The memo would become a family dispute. The board members would feel managed rather than informed, and the 14 grants would become collateral in a power negotiation that had nothing to do with the kids they were supposed to serve. She had to do this herself, in 7 days, at a gala where she already knew she would not be welcomed. The first sign came on Friday. She was cross-referencing the gala's public donor list, available on the Orion Civic Center's website, updated quarterly, when she noticed the Hawthorne name. Not unusual. Hawthorne Capital was a fixture at events like this. What was unusual was the seating notation beside it. Presenting sponsor, adjacent, row 1, table A. Her table was table B. She noted it in her log without drawing a conclusion. The second sign came Saturday afternoon. She was in the office, alone, which was how she preferred to work weekends, when her phone buzzed with a calendar notification she hadn't created. A reminder for a meeting titled Pre-Gala Coordination Call, Hawthorne/Fund Alignment Discussion, scheduled for the following Monday. Her name was not on the invite list. The meeting existed in the fund's shared calendar system, which she had read-only access to as a program coordinator. She screenshot it, added it to her log. Saturday 16th. Pre-gala coordination call identified. Hawthorne Capital listed as participant. Fund senior leadership listed. Program coordination not included. Purpose unclear. She didn't call anyone, didn't ask her supervisor, didn't forward it to her father with a question mark attached. She simply noted that a conversation was happening about an alignment she hadn't been told about, involving a family whose table would be 12 feet from hers at an event she had 7 days to make count. The third sign was quieter, almost missable. Sunday evening, she was reviewing the fund's most recent annual report, the public version, the one sent to donors, and found a 2-paragraph section she had not written, had not reviewed, and had not been asked to review. It appeared under the Program Coordination heading. It described the community grant process in language that was technically accurate but subtly reframed, shifting emphasis from community-identified needs toward donor-aligned impact metrics. 4 words, donor-aligned impact metrics. She read them twice. Then she opened a new page in her log and wrote a single line. Someone is rewriting what this work is for. She didn't know yet who. She didn't know yet how far it went. And she didn't know whether the gala, the memo, the coordination call, and the rewritten paragraph were connected by intention or by coincidence. But she knew this. Her father's name appeared nowhere in any of it, which meant whatever was being built or dismantled was being done in a space where no one expected anyone to be paying close attention. That was a mistake, because Nia Carter had been paying attention to everything for 18 months. Monday's coordination call lasted 41 minutes. She knew because she sat in the hallway outside the conference room with a legal pad and a pen, and she wrote down every fragment that came through the door clearly enough to catch. Not eavesdropping in the dramatic sense. The door was poorly insulated, and 3 people in that room had voices calibrated for spaces twice the size. What she caught was enough. Hawthorne Capital was not just a donor. They were being positioned as a strategic partner in the fund's next operational phase. The restructuring memo, the one with Section 4, subsection C, had originated not from internal leadership, but from a framework document submitted by Hawthorne Capital's Philanthropic Advisory Division 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. While she had been reviewing grant applications and coordinating site visits, someone had been drafting the architecture of a system that would override everything she was doing. She sat with that for a long moment. Then her supervisor opened the conference room door, saw her in the hallway, and stopped. "Nia, did you need something?" This was the moment. She could say yes. She could walk in, introduce herself as N. Carter, watch the room recalibrate, and have the entire conversation restructured around a last name that changed the physics of every room it entered. She looked at her supervisor evenly. "No," she said. "I was just finishing up some notes. I'll be out of your way." She walked back to her desk. Was that the right call? She genuinely didn't know. There was a version of integrity that looked exactly like self-sabotage from the outside. There was a version of patience that was indistinguishable from passivity until the moment it wasn't. But she also knew this: if she used her father's name to open that door, she would never know what was actually behind it. The room would perform for the name. The truth would go back into hiding. If you had that card to play, the one that ends the argument instantly, would you play it early? Or would you wait until you knew exactly what you were really arguing about? She needed to know what she was really arguing about. She had 5 days until the gala. She went back to the memo. Tuesday night, she didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, because she kept running the same calculation and arriving at 2 different answers depending on which variable she weighted more heavily. She sat at her kitchen table at 1 a.m. with the memo printed out, her log open on her phone, and a cold cup of coffee she kept forgetting to drink. She had highlighted Section 4, subsection C in yellow. She had written the names of the 3 board members she needed to reach in the margin. She had drafted, deleted, and redrafted a 1-page impact summary that laid out exactly what a freeze on 14 grants would mean in human terms. Not budget terms, not alignment terms, human terms. Names of programs, enrollment numbers, the 8th grader in Southeast D.C. who had tested 2 grade levels above her peers after 18 months in a fund-supported literacy intervention. The document was good. She knew it was good. The question was whether good was enough. Because here was the calculation she kept returning to. She was a program coordinator. A name without context in a room full of names with enormous context. The 3 board members she needed to reach had combined assets that could fund the entire Carter Community Fund for 11 years. They moved through spaces like the Orion Civic Center with the ease of people who had never once been asked if they were in the right place. And she was going to walk up to them, alone, uninvited to their conversations, with no title that commanded automatic deference, and ask them to read a highlighted memo. What if they don't take her seriously? What if they smile politely and turn away and vote yes on the 22nd anyway? What if doing this alone, on principle, costs 1,000 kids something real? She picked up her phone. Her father's contact was 3 taps away. She knew exactly what he would say. He would say, "Tell me where you are and what you need." No lecture, no conditions. He had always been like that, the kind of steady that didn't require explanation. She held the phone for 40 seconds. Then she set it face down on the table. Not yet. She hadn't exhausted what she could do alone. And until she had, until every door she could open herself had been tried, she wasn't going to let the outcome belong to anyone but her. She picked up the highlighter. She went back to the memo. Wednesday morning, she made 3 decisions before 7 a.m. The first, she would attend the gala alone. No colleague, no buffer, no one whose presence could be misread as borrowed authority. If she walked in with someone senior, the board members she needed to reach would direct their attention there instead. She needed the conversation to be hers, start to finish. The second, she would document everything from the moment she arrived. Not conspicuously. No visible recorder, no notepad in hand. Her phone had a voice memo function she had tested in large ambient noise environments. It picked up clearly within a 6-foot radius, even with a jazz trio playing nearby. She had verified this 2 weeks ago at a fundraising reception she'd attended for an unrelated program. She had been planning for a room like this for longer than anyone would have guessed. The third decision was the one that cost her something. She emailed the fund's executive director, Dr. Elaine Porter, a formal program update, time-stamped, routed through the official system, attaching her one-page impact summary and flagging the 14 grants by name. She framed it as routine pre-board meeting documentation, which it was. It was also a record that she had raised this formally through proper channels before the vote. If nothing came of the gala, if the board members didn't listen, if the vote passed anyway, there would be a timestamp that said, "She tried, she documented it, she did everything right." That mattered, not for her pride, but for the next person who came behind her and needed to prove the system had been warned. She printed 2 copies of the impact summary, folded one into her clutch, kept the other in her desk drawer. Then she opened her log and wrote, Wednesday, 18th. Documentation submitted through official channels, attending gala Saturday as planned, recording enabled, 3 targets identified, no external intervention. This one's mine. She closed the log. She had 3 days. Dr. Elaine Porter responded to her email in 4 hours, not with a conversation, with a calendar invite. Nia, thank you for the update. Let's connect briefly before the gala. Friday, 4 p.m., my office. That was it. No acknowledgement of the 14 grants, no reference to Section 4, subsection C, no indication that the impact summary had been read at all. Just a meeting. The kind of meeting that organizations schedule when they want to manage a conversation before it becomes a problem. Nia accepted the invite and noted the timestamp in her log. Friday's meeting lasted 9 minutes. Dr. Porter was warm, precise, and entirely unrevealing. She thanked Nia for her diligence. She described the board restructuring as a natural evolution and the Hawthorne partnership as an exciting alignment of values. She used the phrase stakeholder ecosystem twice without apparent irony. When Nia placed the impact summary on the desk and walked her through the student enrollment numbers, name by name, program by program, Dr. Porter listened with the careful attention of someone who had already made a decision and was now performing the courtesy of hearing the other side. These are exactly the kinds of outcomes we want to protect, Dr. Porter said. The new framework is designed to strengthen accountability, not restrict access. The freeze clause in subsection C disagrees, Nia said quietly. A pause, brief but real. That language is still being refined, Dr. Porter said. It wasn't. Nia thanked her, collected her summary, and walked back to her desk. She sat down. She opened her log. Friday, 20th, 9-minute meeting, no commitments, no acknowledgement of subsection C. Decision already made at a level above this conversation. She stared at that last line for a moment. Then she got up, went home, and got dressed for the gala. The invitation tearing had taken less than 3 seconds. What followed took considerably longer. After Grant Miller asked her to step aside for credential verification, Madeline Hawthorne had inserted herself so completely into the process that the security team effectively ceded authority to her. This was not unusual for Madeline. She had spent 20 years building a presence in rooms like this that made people instinctively defer, not because she had formal authority, but because she wielded social consequence with the precision of someone who had practiced it into muscle memory. The Carter Community Fund sent 2 invitations, Madeline announced to the growing circle, as though reading from a document only she could see. One was allocated to senior leadership. This young woman is a program coordinator, a junior staff member. She may have simply picked up an invitation that wasn't intended for her level. The phrasing was immaculate. May have simply, not an accusation, a generous interpretation offered publicly, which functioned as an accusation with plausible deniability attached. Chase had 38,000 live viewers now. The comment section was moving too fast to read individual lines, just a blur of judgment scrolling upward in real time. She's shaking. Someone call management. This is so uncomfortable. Why won't she just leave? She wasn't shaking. But the comments didn't require accuracy. They required momentum. Grant Miller turned to Nia with the expression of a man who understood he was trapped between two forces and had already calculated which one had more immediate consequences for his employment. "Miss, if you could provide a secondary form of identification and perhaps a contact at the fund who can verify your attendance." "I have the invitation," Nia said, both halves of it still held flat in her hand. "Which was issued to a department, not to you specifically," Madeline said smoothly. "Anyone could have taken it from an office." Anyone. The word landed in the room with a specific weight, not random, targeted, designed to reframe Nia's presence from authorized to opportunistic without ever using a word that could be directly challenged. Sloane's camera hadn't moved from Nia's face for 4 minutes. Nia felt her phone vibrate once in her clutch. She didn't reach for it. She looked at Grant Miller steadily. "Who has authority to verify credentials at this event?" she asked. "Not informally, formally. Who is the designated point of contact?" Grant blinked. "That would be Dr. Porter, the executive director." "Then let's call Dr. Porter," Nia said. Madeline's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. Grant Miller called Dr. Porter. It took 90 seconds for her to answer, 90 seconds during which the circle around Nia did not shrink, the cameras did not lower, and Chase Hawthorne informed his audience that the situation was escalating in the best possible way. Dr. Porter arrived in person rather than responding by phone. That told Nia something. Either the call had conveyed enough gravity that a voice response felt insufficient, or someone had already reached Dr. Porter before Grant did, and she had been on her way before he dialed. She crossed the marble floor with the measured pace of someone performing calm. Her expression was the expression of institutional crisis management, concerned, authoritative, radiating the specific energy of a person who needed this resolved quietly and immediately. She looked at Nia first, then at Madeline, then at the cameras. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at the cameras. "Mrs. Hawthorne," she said carefully, "thank you for flagging a concern. We take event security seriously." She turned to Grant. "I'll handle this directly." Then she turned to Nia. And here was where the system revealed itself, not through malice, but through the particular mathematics of institutional self-preservation. Dr. Porter had met with Nia 24 hours ago. She knew exactly who Nia was. She had read the impact summary. She had sat across a desk from her for 9 minutes and called her work diligent. "Nia," she said quietly, stepping slightly to the side, an invitation to move away from the circle, away from the cameras, away from the public record of whatever came next. "Why don't we step aside and sort this out?" Not, "This young woman is our program coordinator and her invitation is valid." Not, "Mrs. Hawthorne, you've made an error. Step aside. Sort this out." Language designed to de-escalate by privatizing, by moving the resolution into a space where no one was watching and nothing needed to be formally acknowledged. Nia didn't move. "My invitation is valid," she said, clearly, not loudly, clearly. It was issued to the Carter Community Fund, presenting sponsor for the Program Coordination Department. I am the program coordinator. The invitation reached me through proper internal channels. That's documented. Dr. Porter's expression held. "Of course. I just think it would be easier." "Easier for whom?" Nia asked. The question sat in the air. Chase's viewer count crossed 50,000. Dr. Porter said nothing for 3 full seconds, which, in a room this quiet, this watched, was not nothing. It was an answer that the entire audience had just witnessed her fail to give. The system had entered the room, and it had immediately tried to make the problem smaller than it was. There were 4 people in that room who knew exactly who Nia Carter was. Not guessed, knew. The first was Dr. Porter, who was currently managing her expression with the focus of someone diffusing something she had accidentally armed herself. The second was a man named David Okafor, senior grants manager at the fund, 12 years tenure, the person who had trained Nia during her first month and had once told her quietly, after a particularly difficult site visit, that she was the most precise program mind he had encountered in a decade of this work. David was standing at the far edge of the circle, a glass of sparkling water held at chest height, and he had not moved or spoken since the crowd formed. He was watching. The third was a board member named Patricia Wells, one of the three Nia had come specifically to reach tonight. Patricia had attended 2 of the fund's community site visits in the past year. Nia had coordinated both. They had spoken for a combined total of perhaps 40 minutes across 2 separate occasions, always professionally, always briefly. Patricia was standing close enough to the circle to observe clearly. She had lowered her phone after the first 30 seconds. She had not raised it again. She was also watching. The fourth person was a junior event staff member, a young woman, early 20s, name tag reading Britt, who had checked Nia in at the door 40 minutes ago, had seen the invitation, had scanned it without issue, and had handed back both halves with a smile before Madeline Hawthorne had intercepted her in the main hall. Britt was currently standing near the registration table, arms folded, looking at the floor with the expression of someone who understood precisely what they had witnessed and had already calculated the cost of saying so. None of them spoke. David, because he had a family and a mortgage, and had learned over 12 years that the fund's leadership had a long institutional memory for staff who created friction at donor events. Patricia, because she was still processing, still watching, still deciding. Britt, because she was 22 years old and temporary event staff, and no one had told her she had the right to say anything at all. And so Nia stood there, surrounded by people who knew the truth, in a room full of people recording a lie, and understood with complete clarity that she was, functionally, alone. The knowledge didn't break her. It clarified something. She had documented everything. She had submitted through proper channels. She had the timestamps, the log, the voice memo running in her clutch. She had done everything right, by every standard that was supposed to matter. And it wasn't enough. Not yet. The board vote was in 14 hours. She hadn't forgotten. Even standing in the middle of a circle of cameras and judgment and a live stream that now had 67,000 viewers, the number sat at the back of her mind with the quiet insistence of an alarm she couldn't turn off. 14 hours. If she left now, if she absorbed the humiliation quietly and walked out with whatever dignity a graceful exit allowed, she would lose the only access point she had to the 3 board members before the vote. There was no other venue, no other event, no channel through which a program coordinator could request 40 minutes with Patricia Wells or the 2 others between now and 9 a.m. tomorrow without the request being filtered, delayed, or quietly redirected by someone who had already decided the outcome. The gala was the window, and Madeline Hawthorne had just spent the last 12 minutes methodically bricking it shut. Dr. Porter was still waiting for Nia to accept the invitation to step aside. The pause had stretched long enough that several people in the circle had begun exchanging glances, the particular glances of an audience that had come expecting a donor dinner and was now watching something that felt more significant than anyone had planned for. Chase's commentary had shifted tone. He was still narrating, but the certainty had left his voice, replaced by something more cautious, more hedged. His audience had started asking questions he didn't have answers to. Who is she? Why isn't she leaving? Why does she look like she's waiting for something? Sloan had stopped whispering observations and was simply filming. Grant Miller had taken a half step backward, and Madeline, who had controlled every social environment she had entered for the past 2 decades through the force of absolute confidence, was looking at Nia with an expression that had begun, almost imperceptibly, to recalibrate, because Nia wasn't performing defiance. She wasn't trembling with suppressed emotion. She wasn't calculating her next move with visible desperation. She was simply standing there, as though she had time, as though she knew something the room didn't, which meant either she was extraordinarily composed under pressure, or she actually did know something. Madeline didn't yet know which. That uncertainty, small, new, and growing, was the first real crack in the evening, and Nia felt it open. It was Britt who moved first, not dramatically, not with the energy of someone making a declaration. She simply walked from the registration table to where Grant Miller was standing and said something quietly into his ear. Grant's expression shifted. He looked at Britt, then at his tablet, then at Nia. Then he looked at Madeline Hawthorne with the specific expression of a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was arranged differently than he had assumed. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said carefully, "the check-in log shows the invitation was scanned and verified at entry. Timestamp 7:43 p.m. The system accepted it as valid." Madeline's response was immediate and smooth. "Scanning a barcode confirms the ticket exists. It doesn't confirm the right person is holding it." The name field on the scan reads Carter Community Fund, Program Coordination. Grant paused. "Miss Carter is the program coordinator. One of several, presumably." "The only one listed as attending tonight," Britt said. Her voice was quieter than Grant's, but it carried. She was looking at the tablet, not at Madeline, which somehow made it worse for Madeline, being contradicted by someone who didn't even feel the need to make eye contact. The fund's RSVP submission listed N. Carter, Program Coordination, as the confirmed attendee for both seats. Submitted 19 days ago. Confirmation number is in the system. The circle was very quiet. Chase had stopped narrating entirely. His camera was still running, but his commentary had ceased, replaced by the sound of the room, which was now doing more work than anything he could have added. Patricia Wells had taken 2 steps closer. Nia reached into her clutch and produced her phone. She opened her email, the official RSVP confirmation, time-stamped, bearing the Orion Civic Center's automated header, and held it toward Grant without extending it to anyone else. He looked at it for 4 seconds. "Everything appears to be in order," he said. He said it to the room, not to Madeline, not to Nia specifically, to the room, which meant to the cameras, which meant to the 68,000 people watching in real time who had just heard an official representative of the venue confirm, publicly and without qualification, that Nia Carter had every right to be there. Madeline said nothing. For the first time since the invitation had torn, she said absolutely nothing. And into that silence, Nia's phone vibrated again. Dad calling. Terrence Carter. She looked at the screen for 1 second. Then she declined the call. Not yet. It should have been enough. The timestamp, the confirmation number, the check-in log, Britt's testimony, Grant's public acknowledgement. By any reasonable standard, the matter was resolved. The evidence was clean, documented, and had just been confirmed by the venue's own security infrastructure in front of 68,000 witnesses. It wasn't enough. Madeline Hawthorne turned to Dr. Porter with the measured calm of someone who had spent decades understanding that formal correctness and social authority were 2 entirely different systems, and that the second one frequently overrode the first. "Elaine," she said, quietly, first-name basis, the specific register of 2 people who have had dinner together, who have texted about school board decisions, who understand each other's stakes. The fund's presenting sponsorship this year was contingent on a partnership framework that William and I discussed with your board in September. I think it's worth asking whether tonight is the right environment for internal staff matters to be resolved publicly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't repeat the accusation. She simply repositioned the entire situation. From a question of Nia's right to be present, which had just been answered, to a question of whether Dr. Porter was willing to let a junior employee's conflict with a $1.8 million donor play out on a live stream with 70,000 viewers. The threat was architectural, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Dr. Porter knew exactly where to look. "Nia," she said. Her voice had changed, softer now, almost apologetic, which was somehow worse than authoritative. "I think the most professional path forward is for you to wait in the coordination office while we finish the welcome program. I'll come find you afterward and we can discuss next steps." The coordination office, a room behind the catering entrance with no windows and a folding table. While the 3 board members Nia needed to reach sat in the main hall and the welcome program concluded and the informal conversations that decided everything happened over appetizers, and the vote moved 1 step closer to 9 a.m. Nia understood what was happening with complete clarity. She had documented everything correctly. She had followed every proper channel. She had produced evidence that was unimpeachable. and the system had looked at all of it, weighted against the comfort of a $1.8 million donor relationship, and chosen the donor. Not maliciously, almost politely, which was the part that cost her something real. Standing there in front of 70,000 people, holding two pieces of a torn invitation, understanding that being right had not been enough. It had never been enough, not without something she had spent 2 years refusing to use. She reached into her clutch. She dialed. He picked up on the first ring. He always picked up on the first ring when she called. Not because he was waiting. He was never simply waiting. His calendar didn't allow for that. But because he had arranged his life so that her number was the one thing that interrupted everything else without apology. She had known this since she was 9 years old, when he had walked out of a meeting with 2 state senators to take her call about a bird that had flown into their kitchen window and wasn't moving. He had talked her through it for 11 minutes. The bird had survived. The senators had waited. She had never told him how much that had mattered. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice carried farther than she intended in the sudden quiet of the hall. The jazz trio had stopped playing. She hadn't noticed exactly when. The ambient noise of 200 people had compressed into something closer to held breath. "I'm still at the gala," she said. "There's a family here, live streaming themselves, tearing up an invitation from Carter Community Fund and calling me an intruder. I thought you should know." 3 seconds of silence. Not the silence of someone processing unexpected information. The silence of someone who had just been handed confirmation of something he had already suspected and was now deciding not what to do, but how to do it in a way that served the outcome rather than his own anger. She knew the difference. She had grown up learning to read that silence. "Are you all right?" he asked. 2 years ago, she would have said fine automatically, the reflex of someone who had spent so long proving she didn't need rescue that she had confused self-sufficiency with emotional accuracy. "I'm okay," she said instead, which was different, which was true. "I'm on my way," he said. "I know," she said. "Dad, I need you to come as the fund's founding donor, not as my father. Can you do that?" Another silence. Shorter this time. "I've always been both," he said, "but I understand what you're asking." She exhaled once, quietly, in a way she hoped the voice memo in her clutch didn't catch. This is the part she had been protecting for 2 years. Not his power, not his name. This, the specific quality of a person who understood, without needing it explained, exactly what she needed and exactly what she was asking him not to do. 14 grants, she said. 11 schools. The vote is in 13 hours. "I know about the vote," he said. Of course he did. "Then you know why I waited," she said. "Yes," he said. "I do." He arrived 11 minutes later. No announcement, no security detail, no theatrical entrance designed to command attention. Terrence Carter walked through the main doors of the Orion Civic Center the way he walked into every room. At his own pace, with the particular stillness of someone who had never needed a room to know he was important before he could function in it. He was wearing a dark suit, no pocket square, no visible indication of anything except a man in his late 50s who had somewhere to be and had arrived. The room knew anyway. It started at the edges, a recognition that rippled inward the way these things always do in spaces where everyone is networked to everyone else. A murmur, a nudge, someone pulling up a search on their phone and showing the screen to the person beside them. Chase Hawthorne's camera swung toward the doors before his mind had fully processed why. His livestream comments detonated. Wait, is that V. Carter? Carter Ed? Someone tell me I'm seeing this right. Terrence walked directly to his daughter. He didn't look at Madeline. Didn't look at the cameras, didn't look at Dr. Porter or Grant Miller or the circle of 200 people who had reorganized themselves around this moment without quite realizing they were doing it. He looked at Nia. "Are you all right?" he said, the same question he had asked on the phone, asked again in person because he needed to see the answer, not just hear it. "I'm fine," she said. This time she meant it differently. "I have everything documented." He nodded once, then he turned. Not to Madeline first, to Dr. Porter. Elaine, his voice was even, not cold, even. The register of a man who was not performing composure because composure was not a performance for him. I understand there's been a question about my daughter's credentials this evening. Dr. Porter had gone very still. Terrence, Yes, there was a concern raised about. The concern has been resolved, he said. Grant Miller confirmed the invitation, the check-in log, and the RSVP submission on record. I've just reviewed the documentation Nia submitted through your official channels on Wednesday, time-stamped, properly routed, flagged for board review before tomorrow's vote. He paused. Is that an accurate summary? Dr. Porter said yes, quietly, accurately. Then he turned to William Hawthorne, who had pushed through the outer edge of the circle 40 seconds ago, and was now standing with the expression of a man watching a quarterly projection revise itself in real time. William, Terrence said, I was scheduled to meet with your firm tomorrow morning. A $600 million education infrastructure partnership. 8 months of negotiation. William Hawthorne said nothing, which was, under the circumstances, the only grammatically correct response available to him. Tonight, Terrence continued, your family publicly accused my daughter of fraud, destroyed a valid document, attempted to remove her from an event she had every legal and organizational right to attend, and live-streamed the process to what is now, he glanced briefly at Chase's phone, still recording, approximately 90,000 people. Chase lowered the phone 2 inches, then stopped, because lowering it now felt worse than keeping it up. I want to be precise, Terrence said. This isn't about embarrassment. It isn't about the partnership, though I think we both understand what tonight means for that conversation. It's about something simpler. He stepped back slightly, not away, but to create space for what came next. My daughter came to this event alone, with documentation, a formal impact summary submitted through proper channels, and a voice memo that has been running since she arrived. He looked at Nia. Do you want to play it? Not yet, she said. He accepted that without question. Nia stepped forward. This was the part that was hers, had always been hers, the reason she had waited, documented, submitted, endured. The reason she had declined 2 phone calls and stood in a circle of cameras for 40 minutes without breaking. Not so that her father could arrive and resolve it, so that when the resolution came, there was an unimpeachable record of everything that had preceded it. She looked at Madeline Hawthorne directly. You didn't know who I was, she said. I need you to understand that I know that. You looked at a young woman in a simple dress arriving alone and decided she didn't belong before you had a single piece of information. That decision, the one you made in the first 3 seconds, is the only thing tonight was ever actually about. Madeline said nothing. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were steady, but her hands, at her sides, were very still in the way that hands are still when their owner is applying conscious effort to keep them that way. You were wrong about what I was, Nia continued, but you weren't wrong that I was alone. I was. I came here without a title, without backup, without using a name that would have ended this before it started. I did that on purpose, because I needed the record to show what this room does when it thinks no one important is watching. She reached into her clutch and placed the folded impact summary on the table beside her. The same 1-page document she had brought for the board members, the same one Dr. Porter had received on Wednesday with a timestamp attached. 14 grants, she said. 11 schools. Subsection C of the restructuring memo that Hawthorne Capital's advisory division drafted 6 weeks ago freezes all of them, pending a review with no defined timeline. The board votes in 13 hours. Patricia, she turned to where Patricia Wells was standing, 2 steps closer than she had been 20 minutes ago. I'd like 5 minutes of your time before the welcome program ends. I have the student data, I have the impact projections, and I have a highlighted copy of Section 4 that I think you haven't seen in full. Patricia Wells looked at the summary on the table, then at Nia. I have 10 minutes, she said. Let's find somewhere to sit. The live stream viewer count crossed 100,000. Terrence Carter did not smile, did not speak, did not place a hand on his daughter's shoulder or do anything that would make this moment about him. He simply stood where he was, present, confirmed, witness, and let the record be what it was. A father who had been called as a founding donor, a daughter who had built the case herself, a room that had decided she didn't belong, and a truth that had been documented, time-stamped, and submitted through proper channels long before anyone in this hall had thought to look. What does it cost a system to admit it was wrong? And what does it cost a person to wait long enough to make that admission unavoidable? The board vote happened at 9 a.m. the following morning. 7 members present, 4 votes against the restructuring as written. The freeze clause in Section 4, subsection C, was removed entirely pending independent legal review. The 14 grants remained active. 11 schools opened their doors that Monday morning without knowing how close the funding had come to disappearing. The 8th grader in Southeast D.C. went to her literacy program at 3:45 p.m. like she did every Tuesday. She didn't know any of this had happened. That was in some ways the point. Patricia Wells had called 2 other board members from a quiet corner of the Orion Civic Center at 9:47 p.m. the night before, 40 minutes after sitting down with Nia and the impact summary. The calls had lasted a combined 31 minutes. Nia didn't know what was said in them. She didn't need to. She had given Patricia the information. What Patricia did with it belonged to Patricia. That was also the point. The voice memo was reviewed by the fund's legal counsel the following week, not submitted as a formal complaint, but logged as part of an internal documentation review that had been quietly initiated after the gala by 2 board members who had seen enough of the live stream to understand that the organization had a problem that predated that evening. The restructuring framework was traced back to its origin in Hawthorne Capital's advisory division. The pre-gala coordination call, the one Nia had noted from the hallway on Monday, became part of that review. David Okafor submitted a written statement, unprompted, 3 pages, time-stamped. He had been paying attention too, for longer than anyone had known. Hawthorne Capital withdrew from the partnership negotiation 6 days after the gala. The withdrawal letter cited strategic misalignment. William Hawthorne's statement to the press used the phrase mutual decision 4 times in 2 paragraphs. Chase's live stream, all 93 minutes of it, ending with Patricia Wells saying, "I have 10 minutes, let's find somewhere to sit," had been viewed 11 million times by the following Friday. The comments were not what he had expected when he pressed record. Nia went back to work on Monday. Same desk, same northeast-facing window, same legal pad and pen. A new log entry, dated and time-stamped, noting the board outcome and the grant status and the names of the 11 schools. She didn't frame it, didn't post it, didn't send it to anyone. Her father texted her that afternoon. 3 words, "Proud of you." She read it twice. Then she put her phone face down and went back to the grant application she had been reviewing before it arrived. A small school in rural Virginia. 43 students in a combined 3rd and 4th grade classroom. A teacher who had been running a reading program out of her own pocket for 2 years because the funding hadn't come through yet. Nia read the application carefully. Then she picked up her pen. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like a woman in a simple black dress, holding 2 pieces of a torn invitation, deciding not to leave. What would you have done differently, and at which moment? If this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever been the person standing in that circle, on either side of it, leave a comment below.